Manhunters are the most dangerous beings to ever exist in the galaxy.
Out of every other project that DC Studios has announced recently, Lanterns has probably had the toughest time when it came to winning fans over. The first official images and teaser trailer left a lot of us seriously underwhelmed, mainly because the show seemed to lean more toward grounded detective storytelling than the comic spectacle that Green Lantern is really known for. But then the recent trailer dropped and it started to change that perception by finally showing off the incredible power of the Green Lantern ring and highlighting the kind of chemistry we expected to see between Hal Jordan and John Stewart. We did not just get twice the amount of action and world building, but the latest trailer also confirmed that several iconic Green Lantern villains will finally make their live action debut in the series. Having said that, the biggest reveal in the trailer surely were the Manhunters. If you are a comic enthusiast, I am sure it took you mere seconds to immediately catch that name. Now, the Manhunters were actually the OG peacekeeping force for the Guardians of the Universe, and I am talking about a time when the Green Lantern Corps did not even exist. But over time, these powerful machines ended up rebelling against the Guardians after becoming immensely self-aware and eventually evolving into one of the greatest threats we know. As you can expect, they're going to be the most important villains in the show. So without wasting another moment, let's discuss who these Manhunters really are.
Tied you up to ask you about Manhunters.
What is the trailer basically about? So far, Lanterns have not shown any signs of including any of the space opera wonders from the Green Lantern comics. In fact, it seems like John Stewart and Hal Jordan would end up investigating a murder together in Nebraska instead of taking off to go on adventures in some alien world. Even if there was an uprising of a mild controversy when Damon Lindelof, the co-creator of the show, had joked how a series named Green Lantern would be inherently silly. The latest trailer still brings in a good amount of science fiction, especially when it comes to the villains of the show. We see a mega debut of Tall Sinestro in the trailer, who used to be Hal Jordan's red-skinned mentor before turning into his nemesis. But an even greater threat seems to be the Manhunters. Atan claims these Manhunters to be the most dangerous beings to ever exist in the galaxy. They are apparently shapeshifters who are capable of taking on the form of literally any species, which becomes instantly evident in the trailer when we briefly see a Manhunter transform from a human into their natural form. Now, I know any casual DC fan might have heard the words Manhunter and shapeshifting alien and immediately believed it to be a John Jones reference, you know, the Martian Manhunter, but they surely do not fall under the same category. As you know, the Green Lanterns got their power rings from an immortal race of blue-skinned aliens from planet Oa, who call themselves the Guardians of the Universe. So, before the existence of Green Lanterns were founded by them, these Guardians created an entire force of peacekeeping androids known as the Manhunters. However, these things were built without any emotions, and so they proved to be dangerously inflexible when it came to serving justice. As time passed, these androids became self-aware enough to rebel against the Guardians, who managed to defeat them before rethinking their whole Peacekeeping Corps campaign. But the Guardians did not fully eradicate the Manhunters, and so these machines ended up pledging for vengeance against their creators and the ones they had been replaced with. That is how they evolved to become the consistent villain in the Green Lantern lore, and given their ability to simply shapeshift or blend in, just to hide in plain sight, surely made them much more dangerous. Given the slight glimpse of these villains we got in the trailer, it is safe to say that Manhunters will be right at the center of the mystery that John and Hal are investigating in Lanterns. The Manhunters are the arch-nemesis of the Green Lantern Corps. You may not know this, but the Manhunter robots actually go back to the 70s, as they made their first ever appearance in the 140th issue of Justice League of America by Steve Englehart and Dick Dillon, which was published back in 1977. So in this arc, Hal Jordan was deceived by the Manhunters into believing that he had destroyed a fully inhabited planet by mistake, which, by extension, was a scheme that these robots cooked in order to seek their revenge against the Guardians. I think most of our introduction to these villains came from that one episode in the Justice League cartoon titled as In Blackest Night. There was also a loose adaptation of Justice League of America issue 140 and 141, but here John Stewart's Green Lantern was replaced by Hal's. But the lore history of the Manhunter actually runs deeper, because there exists a Manhunter who was also known as Paul Kirk. First introduced in 1941, he was actually a costume-wearing adventurer created by Joe Simon and Jack Kirby, who are also the creators of Captain America. Even if the comic ended pretty quickly in 1944, it was revived again in 1973 by Walt Simonson and Archie Goodwin. Now, the Manhunters we see within the Green Lantern lore actually look a lot like this human Manhunter's OG red and blue faceplate costume. Eventually, the later Green Lantern stories actually flipped the original history through a retcon. Instead of simply disappearing after the Guardians banished them, the Manhunters secretly infiltrated civilizations across the universe, including Earth, where they spread their influence by blending into the common crowd. That also seems to be the version that Lanterns is drawing from, because in the trailer the Manhunters are depicted to be shape-shifting infiltrators who are hiding among ordinary people without anyone realizing it. Plus, given the existence of the Manhunters in the trailer, Lanterns could also be hinting at the arrival of another major Green Lantern villain. When Paul Ben-Victor was cast, his character Anton was described as an extraterrestrial devoted to exposing the truth and exacting vengeance against those who wronged his people. That description has led many people to speculate that Anton is actually Atros, who's better known as Atrocitus, before becoming the leader of the Red Lantern Corps. In the comics, the homeworld that Atrocitus came from was devastated by the Manhunters, thus giving him a deeply personal reason to hate both them and the Guardians of the Universe. If those theories are correct, the Manhunters may not just be the main villain, but they could also be laying the groundwork for Atrocitus's main live-action debut. But the reign of the Manhunters is not just connected with the Green Lanterns, but also extends to other DC heroes and villains. After their first defeat by the Justice League, this robotic faction came up with a new strategy during the Millennium crossover by secretly infiltrating the lives of Earth's heroes by disguising themselves as trusted friends, allies, and even family members. One of their agents, Mark Shaw, eventually broke away from their influence and went on to become the hero known as Manhunter. Many years later, it was Jeff Johns who expanded the Manhunter's importance during his acclaimed Green Lantern run. He revealed that the brutal uprising of the Manhunter directly led to the creation of Atrocitus, and, like I previously mentioned, his overwhelming rage eventually made him the leader of the Red Lantern Corps. Johns also tied the Manhunters to another iconic DC villain by having the cyborg Superman Hank Henshaw seize control of the robotic army and recruit them into the Sinestro Corps during the Sinestro Corps War. But we might also explore the Martian Manhunter arc. Like I previously discussed, despite the similar names, the Manhunters are not Martians. However, DC later revealed how they borrowed both their name and parts of their code from the ancient protectors of Mars, and that fascinating connection has never been explored in live action. Since a Martian Manhunter has yet to appear in a DC Studios project, Lanterns could be the perfect opportunity to lay the groundwork for his debut. And if the series continues beyond its first season and begins exploring the wider Lantern mythology, it could also open the door for other corps, especially the rage-fueled Red Lanterns, to finally show up. What happened to the Manhunters in the Justice League of America storyline? Even if this storyline was published as a Justice League story rather than a Green Lantern comic, issue 140 of the Justice League of America introduced the Manhunters and completely changed the mythology surrounding the Guardians of the Universe. Nearly every modern Green Lantern story, from Emerald Twilight to Sinestro Corps War and Blackest Night, builds on ideas that were first established here. The upcoming Lantern series also appears to be borrowing heavily from this storyline, and I am particularly talking about its depiction of the Manhunters as hidden infiltrators. Now, the story begins with Hal Jordan facing what seems like the worst mistake of his career. While carrying out a mission as Green Lantern, he encounters a massive magnetic object hurtling through space and believes it to be an imminent threat. So Hal destroys it with the power of his ring. However, a few moments later, he finds out that what he believed was a lifeless celestial body was actually an inhabited world which means billions of innocent lives appear to have been wiped out because of his actions. Naturally, he was overwhelmed by the guilt, and so when Hal returned to Earth, he confessed everything to his fellow Justice League members, as he genuinely believed he deserved to be held accountable for what he had done. But before the Justice League could fully investigate the situation, a mysterious armored lawman calling himself Manhunter stormed into the Justice League's headquarters and announced that Hal Jordan was under arrest. He claimed to represent an ancient intergalactic police force whose authority predates even the Green Lantern Corps. Now, to the League, this declaration sounded absurd, but as the Manhunter had incredible technology and combat skills, he managed to overpower several Justice League members and even succeeded in taking Green Lantern into custody. It did not take long for the comic to establish that these newcomers were not ordinary robots or bounty hunters, but rather operated according to an absolute interpretation of justice and recognized no higher authority. Because the Justice League refused to believe that Hal was guilty without proof, Batman, Superman, Green Arrow, Black Canary, Wonder Woman, Flash, and the rest of the team began investigating the alleged destruction of the planet. As they gathered evidence, cracks began to appear in the Manhunters' case, and before you know it, the League discovered inconsistencies suggesting that Hal had been framed. Now, rather than delivering justice, the mysterious organization was determined to kill Green Lantern regardless of the truth, and that is when the story gradually evolved from being a courtroom-style drama into a conspiracy thriller, with the heroes realizing that they were confronting an enemy that had been operating in secret for far longer than anyone imagined. This issue also introduced one of the most important characters connected to the Manhunters, which is Mark Shaw. Unlike the robotic Manhunters themselves, Shaw was a human recruited to serve their organization. He was frustrated by what he saw as corruption and inefficiency in Earth's legal system, and so he accepted the Manhunters' promise of absolute justice. To him, they represented order without compromise. However, Shaw did not yet realize that he too had become a pawn in a much larger scheme laid out by the cult's true leaders. This would eventually lead to his complicated future as the anti-hero known as Manhunter. However, the real stars of the issue are the Manhunters themselves, as they are presented as an ancient order that existed long before the Green Lantern Corps. Unlike the Lanterns, who rely on individual judgment, compassion, and free will, the Manhunters follow rigid programming. Their famous motto, "No man escapes the Manhunters," perfectly captures their philosophy, because once they decide that someone is guilty, there's no room for mercy, context, or redemption. For them, justice is reduced to a simple calculation, which makes them terrifying because they cannot be reasoned with and are just relentless machines carrying out what they believe to be perfect law. Now, in the next issue, we finally learn that the Manhunters were actually the guardians of the universe's first attempt at creating an interstellar police force. The Guardians eventually abandoned them after realizing that emotionless machines could never truly administer justice fairly. The Green Lantern Corps was created to replace them with living beings capable of compassion and independent judgment. Feeling betrayed by their creators, the Manhunters rebelled, beginning a conflict that would echo throughout Green Lantern history for decades. Rewinding to the start, the comic opens with the Justice League scattered across several battlefields as Green Lantern, Green Arrow, and Black Canary are locked in combat with Mark Shaw, the human Manhunter agent recruited by the organization. Elsewhere, Wonder Woman and the Flash are trapped aboard the Justice League satellite after the leader of the Manhunters, the Grand Master, places the headquarters inside an impenetrable energy sphere. That is when Superman and Batman realize that defeating the Manhunters physically won't be enough, because in order to stop them, they first needed to understand who these mysterious beings really were and why they were so determined to destroy Hal Jordan and discredit the Green Lantern Corps. It is one of the Guardians of the Universe who finally revealed the truth. Apparently, billions of years earlier, after the rogue scientist Krona's disastrous experiment unleashed evil into the universe, the Guardians felt personally responsible for restoring order, and so they created an army of emotionless androids known as the Manhunters. They initially believed that machines would enforce justice more objectively than emotional living beings ever could, and so the Manhunters became the universe's very first interstellar police force by traveling from world to world as tireless law enforcers. At first, the experiment seemed like a complete success, as these Manhunters never grew tired, never accepted bribes, never acted out of fear or prejudice, and never questioned their assignments. To the Guardians, this was the perfect embodiment of justice because unlike organic beings, the robots could not be corrupted by emotion. Every criminal would be hunted down by them, every law enforced, and every sentence carried out with mathematical precision. In fact, the Guardians believed they had finally created a flawless system that would keep peace across the universe forever. But that perfection soon revealed how the Manhunters only understood obedience, as they interpreted every command literally and viewed every situation in absolute terms. This basically meant that mercy, compassion, redemption, or even context meant nothing to them. To a Manhunter, there was only one objective, which was to identify the target and complete the mission. Over centuries, that rigid programming evolved into fanaticism as the concept of justice became secondary to the hunt itself. Eventually, the Manhunters rebelled against the very beings who created them as they figured out that the Guardians themselves stood in the way of their vision of absolute order. After they initiated a full-scale attack on Oa, these robots nearly succeeded because during the battle, their leader attempted to draw limitless energy directly from Oa's central power battery, hoping to gain enough power to destroy the Guardians permanently. But then the overload backfired and ended up disabling the weapons of the Manhunters, thus giving the Guardians an opportunity to defeat them. Now, rather than destroying their failed creations, the Guardians made the mistake of exiling the surviving Manhunters into deep space. Of course, the Manhunters never forgave their creators for abandoning them. Instead, they quietly rebuilt their forces while plotting their revenge against both the Guardians and the police force that had replaced them. According to the testimony of the Guardian, the apparent destruction of the planet Orinda at the hands of Hal in the previous issue was never real, as it was an elaborate deception designed to frame Hal for genocide and undermine the reputation of every Green Lantern in the universe. If the Green Lantern Corps could be portrayed as reckless killers, countless civilizations would lose faith in the Guardians' new protectors. So, the entire conspiracy was simply the opening move of what was a revenge campaign these Manhunters had been cooking. Anyway, after the comic explores how the Guardians realized that their greatest mistake was believing that emotion was a weakness, they began recruiting living beings from every sector of the universe who were chosen not because of their extraordinary willpower and the courage to overcome fear. That is how the Green Lantern Corps was born. By the end of the comic, Batman discovered that the supposedly destroyed planet Orinda was hidden rather than annihilated, which pretty much exposed what the Manhunters had been up to. Meanwhile, Mark Shaw finally learned the truth about the organization he pledged to serve, and because he thought he had joined an honorable order dedicated to justice, Shaw ended up turning against them after being manipulated by their fanatical ideologies. It was Shaw who ended up destroying the Grand Master before taking on the title of the Manhunter and redeeming himself. Even though Justice League of America issue number 140 and 141 ended the immediate conflict, the revelations from this story arc became the foundation of nearly every major Green Lantern story that followed. In fact, that is how Jeff Johns expanded the history of the Manhunters as their rebellion evolved into the infamous massacre of Sector 666, the atrocity that created Atrocitus and ultimately gave rise to the Red Lantern Corps. Apart from that, many other stories also revealed that many Manhunters survived in secret and kept infiltrating civilizations across the galaxy before embedding agents on Earth during the Millennium crossover. In fact, you can feel the influence of the Justice League of America storyline even in the Lanterns trailer, as it also seems to be dealing with the tension between absolute justice and human judgment. But that is just my 2 cents. What do you guys think will happen with these Manhunters in Lanterns? What kind of power upgrades would the modern depiction of these android villains get as opposed to their comic counterpart? Let us know about your thoughts and theories in the comment box below.